We have been told our pursuits or jobs should define us. If I don't run fast enough, I myself, Steve, am a failure. So often what happens is we see these athletes and we're like, I want to be Michael Jordan. And we don't realize that they are the exception. Like even among elite athletes, you've got to have that intrinsic motivation fire burning. And if you don't, you're gonna be in trouble.
His name is Steve Magness. Steve is a former elite track and field athlete.
He is a performance scientist and expert who works with Olympic athletes.
Elite track and cross-country coach turned author.
By the age of 13, 70% of kids have already quit sport. We have a youth health, obesity epidemic going on. How many people in my life do I have that I can call, even if I haven't talked to them for a while, and say, hey, Kelly, I'm struggling with something. Can I talk to you? The shortcut they think they're taking towards success doesn't actually lead to success.
What surprised you most about this project?
And that's a great question, Kelly.
Hey everyone, Juliet here. I am so pumped to finally share something that Kelly and I have been working on behind the scenes for months. It's called the Starrett System.
If you're like us, you're juggling a demanding career, an active lifestyle, and maybe even a family, and probably a million other priorities. You're the type who gives it your all, but if we're being honest, your body might not be feeling as unstoppable as it used to.
Maybe you're waking up stiff and sore, feeling drained before the day even starts, or you've got nagging aches and old injuries that keep you from the activities you love. You've tried all the programs, all the fads, and maybe you've even seen some results, but nothing sticks and feels like you're spinning your wheels.
The problem isn't your motivation, it's your strategy. And that's where the Starrett System comes in. Starting January 27th, we're launching a program designed specifically for high performers like you. This isn't about quick fixes or unsustainable routines. It's about building strength, mobility, and energy into your life in a way that works for you.
We've created a system that simplifies your approach to health and performance. During the week, you'll follow progressive workouts that prioritize strength, recovery, mobility, sleep, and sustainable nutrition. On the weekends, it's all about playing outside and doing what you love.
This is about creating a body that doesn't just survive your busy life, but thrives in it. Head over to starrettsystem.com to learn more and join us. January 27th is just around the corner, and we can't wait to help you unlock the strength and energy you deserve.
Steve, welcome to the Ready State podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
We've obviously had your partner, Brad, on this, Brad Stolberg, for listeners on this podcast before. And Kelly and I are huge fans of you and all of the content you put out and your Instagram. And so we are really excited to have you on here today.
Yeah, I want to set this up for everyone that you're one of my, I'm a religious reader of everything you put up. You're highly influential because you walk me back from the edge a lot. And one of the things that I think is so wonderful about your content is that I'm going to say you're a decent coach. You're decent, right? You have a little bit of experience in high performance, and yet you translate and transmute that for the rest of the mortals so beautifully. And I think it's really unusual to have this depth and breadth of coaching experience and skill, and then being able to actually bring your arms around it and make sport relevant. So thank you for that.
I don't know what to say about that.
And we're out.
Good job, everyone. I just got to record that and play that to myself all the time, and that'll be my hype speech. So
Are you saying it doesn't feel like that in the coaching sphere right now?
You know, sometimes I feel like I'm, drowning in the coaching sphere and fighting upstream. But no, I appreciate that, Kelly. And right back at you guys, I think it's important to put good stuff out there. And I think we're all trying to do our little part in the crazy internet world.
So your bio says this very simple sentence, which is you write about mental and physical performance. What does that mean?
It means I don't really know how to describe what I do, because as my background is in coaching, my love is in running, but my academic background is exercise physiology. But I'm like an old school coach's coach, which means you've got to understand all of it. And I didn't learn this. I didn't understand this at first. I just thought hey, if I understand the physiology, I understand the science of writing workouts, I write the best workouts ever, everyone will get better. And it just doesn't work that way.
What do you mean?
Yeah. Tell us more. I mean, I have lots of stories to share about that, but let's hear more. Tell us more.
Well,
give us an example.
You can have the perfect training plan. Something that is by the book, defined as the greatest thing ever. If you give it to 10 other wonderful coaches, they'll be like, oh yeah, this works. This will get the athlete faster. But then on race day, they show up and it doesn't translate. And you have to figure out as the coach, okay, why didn't that translate? And it's not just us guessing about this. We have research on this that shows that, you look at college athlete improvement. A lot of it can be tied to, are they stressed out over class, exams, or, finals or not? So during a stressful period of time, they will not adapt to workouts in the same way as if they, were in the off season or in the summer. So if you write the perfect workout, but it's exam week, doesn't matter. You didn't take into account that external factor. And the same goes with translating things from the physical side to the mental side on performance day, right? I've had athletes and college kids and professional athletes who, if mom or dad show up and they've got this weird relationship with mom or dad, they're not going to perform as well as they could if mom or dad didn't show up. And
Wait, are you saying for a second that human beings are complex psycho-emotional beings and don't always have healthy relationships? We just hey, aren't we just a family on this team? Oh my gosh.
This is so good. I mean, this is so good. And what it makes me think of a little bit is that, we were like one of the first people to start talking about like maybe not sitting so much all the time. Like we started talking about that back in 2010. And then we started being like known as like these standing desk people. And we're like, no. Let's break this down a little bit. Like what we were trying to do is help people like run faster, be better at CrossFit, lift more weights, be better athletes. And what we saw is that they couldn't do that if they were sitting all the time. And so we actually had to look at that part of their lives and sort of figure out ways to unpack that and help people think about that as athletes. Not at all because we set out to be like, let's be the people who talk about not sitting all the time, right? So it seems like, we all sort of have come to realize this. And I think the word performance is also what we've landed on as well. Some people say, well, what is it you guys do? And we're like, well, we're human performance coaches. And then people, turn their head to the side and say, what does that even mean? This is going to lead into a question, though, and I do want to ask a lot of questions about your book. But beforehand, you just wrote this blog called In Defense of Performance, a Manifesto, and you write that the idea of performance has flattened and been appropriated by all kinds of nonsense. That's a quote from your blog. And I would love, what do you mean by that? Tell me a little bit more about that, because I do think this word performance is something that Kelly and I have landed on. We've been using the word human performance to sort of, tie this big bow around what it is we're doing. But what does that mean? And why did you write that article? And what do you mean by it having been appropriated and flattened?
Yeah, what I mean is we've kind of like bastardized it. Essentially, like the internet has shifted performance because like we landed on performance for the same reason that you did. It was this all-encompassing word that doesn't just encompass, I want to lift more weights or run a faster mile or sell more things. It's how are we performing holistically as a human being? And I think what I mean by how we flatten that is we've kind of, made it into this like social media Instagramification of it, which is it, you look a little bit stronger, you look like you have the perfect routine and you're great at everything and everything all falls in line, but that's not the real world. And what we were trying to do in that piece is kind of bring a little bit more reality to it, which is the complexity and messiness that we talked about. Meaning, if you've worked with high class or elite performers in sport or anything, you realize that it doesn't all go swimming like, right? It never does. And even with the best in the best, you're struggling with things and trying to figure out, okay, how do we navigate these things to help people perform better? And the other part of this in that is that if you look at high trained elite athletes, when you're in that spot, you realize that the answer often means like going back to the basics, right? It just means, are you sleeping? Are you consistent on your workout? Like, are your relationships healthy, happy, etc.? Are you doing the basic things that you need to lift weights, like get stronger, get faster, like get your mobility on? But in the online world, what we kept seeing is from people who aren't at that elite level, they keep looking for like the magic bullet of things. And from our perspective, we saw people who were like reaching for the like thing that was for the final 1%. Well, they were, sleeping 4 hours a night, right? Or overworking and never, to use what you guys made popularize, never leaving their desk for like 8 hours straight. And you just looked at the simple things, and I think it's a call for that manifesto is a call for timeout to be like, hold on, let's look at performance holistically, and then let's look at what are the basic things that we need to do to like get us 95% of the way there. And most of us should be doing these things before worrying about like the, icing on the cake.
There's a couple things I want to dive into, but one of the things that I think I want to just double click on is when I really started working with a local university and, having access to sort of all the teams, the questions that come out of the noise. And there's a lot of noise in sort of performance data, trying to write the perfect secret scroll program to have kids peak on this day. It really feels like alchemy. It feels like magic. And then you're like, oh yeah, this kid, like you say, is in finals, or just broke up with their partner, or crashed on their scooter the day before NCAAs and now has a huge rash on their leg. And, it really is complicated. And a lot of what I end up doing, and it's interesting that you said sort of the mental performance piece, because I am more and more interested in ideas of like culture and communication. And do people feel safe and seen? And right, can they be vulnerable? Can coaches be? And I'm like, wow, that had nothing to do with what was the best way to train hip extension or preload carbs for this thing. This kid didn't even eat breakfast, so how can we even have a conversation about did this workout work? So I really appreciate that. And one of the things I want to just highlight in the thing you just said was that number one, the Instagramification of performance has made it seem like it's available to everyone. Elite performance is democratized. And I want to say, being married to a mutant, it is not democratized. Like, what ends up happening is that mortals like us can do the things and become competent, right? But that's not the same thing as elite. And I think we really have and I think that's good. We want to take those lessons out. And the second thing is that the internet has been really, really sort of confusing, because we think all roads lead to performance, and aesthetics and body composition and lifestyle and hobby is not the same thing as showing up in the Olympic final and getting someone there and winning another gold medal after having a baby. Those things are so divergent that people have, lost their minds and they're starting to mix. So I just, those two things I wanted to just kind of highlight.
The other thing I've noticed, this is not a question, but and I have a background as a lawyer, and when you're in court, you give a certain weight to different types of evidence, right? So like if you have a piece of evidence that's from like a serious expert, that gets more weight than like, a jailhouse informant, right? And I think we've really mixed that up in the health and fitness space. Like, yes, I think it probably makes sense to wear blue blockers if you can, but maybe that doesn't have the same weight in terms of importance as like sleeping or eating vegetables, right? And I think we've made this big mash.
Misplaced precision.
Yeah, and I think we've given too much weight to certain things that maybe don't move the needle enough, and not given enough weight to things that do move the needle a lot, especially for 95% of us. So, what do you think? Like, I just have to ask this question in terms of before we move on.
We haven't even let Steve speak in like 10 minutes. Sorry, Steve.
In terms of the internet insanity out there, like, what are you seeing that just needs to be like thrown immediately in the garbage can? I'm sure there's a lot of things.
He doesn't point
No,
punch
I'm
down
not saying
or
to
negative.
anyone. I'm not saying throw anyone in the garbage can.
Where are we
Just-
making the biggest
There's
mistakes?
some ideas out there, where are we making the biggest mistakes? And I'm talking about like for the 95% of us. Again, I think there's a lot of cool things that the
Well, you think
5
you're
or
in the
1%.
95%. That's so cute.
But for the 95% of us, like what are the things that you can just immediately throw in the garbage can that you keep seeing on the internet from your point of view?
This should be an easy question, but it's surprisingly hard because it's like the overwhelm. And I think if you look at the reasons why that, it's because the incentives are, it's hard to sell stuff telling people go take a walk, like get up and get out of your desk and eat real food and move and lift some things, right? It's easier to sell things if you say, hey, this special gadget that emits this miraculous light, like, will make the difference for that injury you have, or this magical supplement. And so it's very alluring to kind of just grab onto the unique thing. And if you're selling the unique thing, like, you're incentivized to, because it differentiates you from other people. So I think understanding that all of our incentives are to go away from the basics is step one. As far as, what needs to get thrown away, as Kelly said, like, I hate calling people out or even things out on the internet because it makes me feel good for about 15 minutes and then just like horrible afterwards. And I just feel like,
Agreed.
I'm like, oh, this sucks. But here's what I'll say is that you can break down, for 95% of people, you can break down, if we look at health, mental, physical health, into very simple things. And if anything's outside of these very simple things, like far outside of it, it's probably, someone selling you something. So like doing lots of easy movement, that can be walking, jogging, cycling, whatever, most days doing something like that, right? Doing something relatively hard, at least probably once a week. If you're doing that 5, 6, 7 times a week, you're probably be sold a story, because elite athletes don't do hard workouts that often or that frequently, right? Eating real food, like sleep, recovery, having friends, having real relationships, doing real things in the real world, getting up and not sitting at your desk all the time. Like, these are the things, that work. Now, in that list, I didn't name like any super secret fad diet. There are some supplements that work really well. We could go on a list like creatine, caffeine, etc. But the ones that work really well, like, everyone knows about. The ones that, if you say, hey, no one knows about these, they probably don't work very well, because if they worked for a lot of people, like, most people would use them, like creatine or caffeine. So I think as we go down that list, even things like, even if you look at recovery metrics and things like that, like, elite athletes use all sorts of recovery stuff. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. As a coach, sometimes you're just like, hey, yeah, go use that gadget because, like, it's not going to harm you, but it might convince you that you feel a little bit better after you raced your first race and have a second race coming up. So let's go for it. Like, put on the magic stuff. Let's try it. Some of that stuff can work, but like, you have to look at the cost benefit of, like, is it really the difference maker? Probably not. Is there a cost to it? If you're an elite athlete and you got it free? No, probably. If you're some guy and you're going to spend, thousands of dollars on some gadget when you're not getting enough sleep and not, eating real foods and not getting outside occasionally, like, start there. And I think that's my message to people, is that I call it the looking for the kinks in the pipe. So even just briefly, whenever I get an elite runner who's comes to coach me, chances are they were coached by a really good coach before they came to me. But even then, all I do is I say, send me your training, send me everything you've done, blah, blah, blah. We go through it all. And all I am doing is looking for the big kink in the pipe that they haven't addressed yet. And inevitably there is one. Sometimes it's they're not prioritizing sleep. Sometimes it's, oh, you've done a lot of long workouts, but we haven't done any faster workouts, so we're going to add some faster workouts. Sometimes it's you haven't really, done much strength training. We're going to add that into it. But 9 times out of 10, even with a lead athlete, there is some big bucket item where I'm like, this is low risk, high reward. We're going to start there. And I think if people applied that same kind of, approach to their own lives, especially if you're not a lead athlete, you're going to find something that has a big bang for your buck that isn't going to cost you thousands of dollars and that will actually make a difference.
I think also one of the things I love about this message, which is the message we're also trying to put out into the world as well, is I think because also thanks to the internet and sort of the glorification of professional sports and professional athletes and elite athletes, I think many people can think they're all doing it perfectly. And I think it's got to be sort of like heartening for people to hear that like even the best of the best are still, working hard to try to make sure that they hit all these corners. Because guess what? We're humans and life is complicated and you can have a baby or an injury or a stressful time at work or a death in the family or whatever. There's just, things happen to us as humans. And so I think, part of this journey of trying to be healthy, which is what most of us are trying to do, is complicated and we can't always hit all the buckets. But I think this sort of idea of just making sure we always default back to these basic things is really the message.
And one of the things I love that you're talking about is taking this role in sort of as the performance coach, as generalist. And you really have to see how all the pieces interact together and this sort of systems approach, because that's the piece that always gets missed, is that we have people who are so good at their siloed thing and they don't understand how the whole thing works. And all of the coaches that I respect so much now are literally can talk nutrition and talk programming and talk community and soft tissue work. And I'm like, whoa, you're just a rugby coach. Hold up. How did you become so?
Because you have to.
You have to.
Yeah.
And I really like that this, when I am asked to come in and help evaluate, I do the same thing. And oftentimes it has nothing to do with looking at their positions and how they train those positions, which is really my super sneaky forte. But I'm like, hey, I don't think you ate before or after your competition or your training. And maybe, 3 hours of high output without drinking anything is a little weird. And let's try this. And when you see those kinks, it's pretty remarkable. And the same thing happens to this when we talk to people in our neighborhood about the same approach. So this global generalist approach, thank you, David Epstein, for reminding us to be generalists. But I think you really nailed it.
Well,
so go ahead.
I just want to put a pin in that because I think it's spot on. And all the coaches I know and have been mentored were like that as well. And I got to give a special shout out to, track coaches in particular.
Yes.
I think have to have this for a couple reasons. A, we have to deal with a bunch of events and we've got to figure out the physiology, the biomechanics, all that stuff as well. And then B, no one cares about our sport. So we often don't have the strength coach, the psychologist, the nutritionist, even at the college level. You just got to figure it out. And although that might be, to some a, detriment, I think for coaches, it's a huge, boost because it forces you to understand at enough of a level so you can see the global impact of everything. And then when you still can't figure it out, it still gives you the ability to call, someone with a superpower like you, Kelly, say, hey, here's my understanding. I need some help here, but here's how it fits in. And that's where the good coaches lie, I think.
I would just like to correct you and say that we do care about your sport once a week, for 1 week every 4 years.
That's true.
Just as a correction, we care a lot. We really get into it, and then we do forget about it. No,
you
huge fans of track, actually.
And you bring up, we have a lot of track friends. You bring up something that I think is really important that I want everyone to understand, because again, the internet is as evil force. It's easy to always be thinking at a global level and hey, this one size fits all approach is going to solve the issues of the individual. And we have come to believe that the hyper local person, like these issues of performance and in safety and feeling, it takes a minute to develop relationships, and you have to understand the person in front of you and the baggage they bring and the worries and expectations they bring. And we have one of the teams I work with has a lot of international players, and just understanding the nuance of how they interact and their communication norms and family norms is part of saying, here's how we're going to be a group of people that gets together to, to get some awesome work done. And that is a very local phenomenon. And sometimes the internet is, has like, if you don't know the athlete in front of you, I'm going to get some results because your programming is really excellent, but I need to see you day to day. Stuart McMillan used to watch his athletes come in and there's a low fence. Those kids who walked around the fence versus hopped over the 1 foot fence. He was like, oh, they're burned, or that kid needs a little hug or some rest. It was because in the moment he could see that athlete was hopping the fence or walking around the 1 foot fence. And unless you're on site, you can't know.
You got to know the patterns. My high school coach called it, he told me this once. He said, I had to be at practice first because I had to see how each person walked out the door.
Oh, so genius. Yeah. High school coach.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so I still do want to get to your new book coming out on February 4th. But beforehand, I want to take a slight detour, although I think they're connected, and see if we can dive in a little bit on your thoughts about youth sports. And for context here, we're actually, right, I know you have an extra bonus going along with your book about youth sports. We're actually writing a book about youth sports right now as well. So we're obviously in the same mind zone.
Kismet.
But I guess what I'd love to know is, what are there some things, a few things that you see that parents
trends
are what's sort of your take on what's going on in youth sports right now and how we can make the experience better for kids and parents and even coaches, because I think sometimes coaches get too much is put upon them and there's too much expectation for often coaches that are working for free. How do we make the youth sports experience better?
How long do we got?
I mean, we got all the time.
So here's the deal. I get to speak to a lot of coaches from a variety of sport, and no matter who I'm talking to, this question always comes up. Youth sports always comes up. Even if I'm talking to elite professional level coaches, they ask me, well, how do we deal with this youth sport problem? And I think everyone recognizes it from all angles of it. So what's going on here? A couple different things. I think first, if you look at the data, it's pretty abysmal. I forget the stat off the top of my head, but it's something like by the age of 13, 70% of kids have already quit sport. Okay, who had tried it and then quit. If you think about that in the context of we have a youth health, obesity epidemic going on, that's a pretty bad number if we're looking to establish lifetime, healthy practices. If you dig into why that occurs.
Wait, I got to stop you because you just made the assumption that theoretically playing sports could lead to a lifetime of health. I just want to say that may not be true currently.
That is true how we've organized it. Yes, that is true, which is one of the things that I think is important. If we look at how we've organized youth sport, is we've looked at it as almost a gateway towards professional sport. Because if you look at, again, not in every sport, but if you look at youth sports, they're often the gateway towards, getting on the travel team, getting on the select team, which then sets us up for getting on the college team and getting on the college scholarship, which then sets us up for getting the professional sport, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a very narrow path and a very narrow number of people that get smaller and smaller as we go. So if our system is set up partially in that regards, and you're increasingly seeing it be so as we have youth sports be more pay to play and more travel select sport versus, old school YMCA recreational options that used to be out there. That comes with it a kind of belief that, okay, sport is about like competing and finding the best athletes instead of these things that we used to think sport was for, which there was like, physical fitness, development, character, growth, etc.
Fun.
So we
play. How dare you use that F word?
We've got this fundamental broken thing, and if you come back to it again, if you come back to some of the data, if you look at why does youth sport dropout occur, a lot of it, two of the big reasons are is a fear of failure and a moving from play to essentially like feeling like they have to, that often comes from parent, coach, adult that is driving the thing. So when I look at youth sports, I sit back and I think like we've got to fundamentally like redirect how we're doing that. We've got to bring back the play. We've got to bring back the fun of it all. We've got to shift from not just having a pathway for like development of elite, but a pathway of like, hey, sports is good, fun, character development. Like, how do we keep people in this long enough? And I think, in my book, I tell this one story about how I got started in running, which essentially was the short version is I was a soccer player who in 5th grade almost broke the, elementary school mile record for my elementary school. And I wanted to get my name up on the board. And I took a shot at it, came a couple seconds short, didn't train, didn't do anything. And my PE teacher goes, hey, Steve, like you can break that record. You just got to train a little bit and we can try it again. I said, great. This running thing, I'm pretty good at it. I'll train. I went home the next day. My dad took me to track. We had no idea what we were doing. He said, okay, just go run. I said, okay, I'll go run. So I ran a hard mile at the track. I said, running sucks. This was really painful. I want to go back to play soccer. So I did. I didn't take another shot at that mile record. My dad was like, okay, like you enjoy soccer, go play soccer. So I didn't take another shot. I didn't run track. 4 years later, once I go from 5th grade to 9th grade, I fall in love with the sport of track. If I would have been forced by my dad or PE teacher or whoever to say, hey, you're really good at running, like you need to go all in at 5th grade, I guarantee you my path would have ended up differently. And I would have been like, this sucks. You're taking away from the sport that I really wanted to play, soccer. So like, screw you. But because I was able to develop into it myself, without like mom or dad or coach or whoever like yelling at me to go down this path, I fell in love with this sport. And if you look at research, whether we're looking at sport, hobby, academic interests, kids tend to follow a pattern, which is they explore broadly. Something catches their interest. They dabble a little bit deeper. And sometimes that dabble turns from interest into a passion, but sometimes it turns from dabble interest to, I'm going to go back broad and go somewhere else. And we have to allow kids to do that kind of explore pattern until they find something that is like, I'm captured by it. Let's go. And then you support and scaffold them to be able to, go deep on the thing. But I think too often what happens is we set up a whole environment that allows them or forces them to try and go deep early. And when all the adults in their life are saying, hey, Johnny, Jimmy, this U12 basketball game is like make or break for your NBA career, the kids are going to feel that pressure. And look, I can tell you story after story. My kids are young, toddlers, but my wife is an elementary school teacher, so I get to go to all these like elementary school soccer and baseball and whatever games of her kids because they all invite her. And then they inevitably find out that like I've coached professional athletes or, was a college track coach. And I can't tell you how many times I get a parent come up and be like, hey, my 7-year-old's got a future and is going to go to the Olympics, I think. Can you do X, Y, and Z? And I'm just like, deer in headlights. Like, what do I say to this kid? And the parents care, but what they've been told is their care has been misdirected towards like a misguided path. And we need to course correct on that misguidedness.
And I want to say that, number one, I wish I was in that therapy session when you were talking about the lost opportunity to be the elementary
school mile
I
champion.
just walked away. I love that. Like you're just like all your success as a coach is just burning to recapture that.
Your Instagram profile could be like elementary school mile champion.
Almost.
Second place. This episode of the Ready State Podcast is brought to you by Element.
It is right around the new year.
Yeah, it's like New Year, New You time.
And what we see is that people are like, okay, I gotta dress it up. So typically what happens is we have a lot of friends who are out there and they just rip out all the carbohydrates. They're like, just not eating another carb. I'm going to eat turkey and nuts and then just live on it. And going keto.
Or they're doing like some kind of January challenge where they're like stripping out a lot of the carbs or something.
And one of the things that happens when you strip out carbohydrate is that, you're going to lose some weight. And one of the reasons is that you end up kicking out all of the glycogen, all the sugar that your body's been storing, right? All the energy. But water goes along with that. And so a lot of times what happens is that people end up feeling achy. They feel terrible. And one of the ways to combat that, because going low carb is entirely up to you. If you don't have to do anything aggressive and it helps you reset, we're not judging. But adding salt back into your life during this time makes a huge difference.
Huge difference in just overall how you feel, and probably will help whatever challenge or program you're trying to do be sustainable, because you'll actually feel good and keep up your energy throughout the day.
And one of the things that happens is if people are eating less processed foods, number one. Number two, they're eating just less food. Oftentimes their food choices get real simple and they're undersalted. So already you're an athlete and you're probably not getting enough electrolytes, or you're not replenishing electrolytes. Then you're either stripping out carbohydrate entirely, or you're eating in such a way that you haven't salted anything, right? That sashimi chicken breast and brown rice has a lot of salt on it. And guess what? There's a solution. It's called Element. And adding in a couple packets of Element will change your life and make whatever you're doing with your diet and your own body composition up to you. That's fine. No judgment here. But it will make it a lot more successful because you'll feel better.
Plus it tastes so good.
Oh my gosh. Quit that. Also, make it hot, make it cold, add it sparkling.
There's so many ways to enjoy it.
Did we mention we literally drink it every day? Right now, if you order through our link, you can get a free sample pack with all of Element's flavors. And if you want a party in your mouth, of course, try sparkling. Go to drinklmnt.com/TRS.
This episode of the Ready State Podcast is brought to you by Momentous.
What are we talking about today?
Vital aminos.
Dude, look, whole food always rules. Trying to eat a diverse, high-quality protein sources, that's the rule. But how does that steak feel for you first thing in the morning before you work out?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is I usually work out first thing in the morning.
Struggle bus, bro.
I struggle to have any desire to eat actual food before I work out. And I used to just have like a small cappuccino and go work out. And my nutritionist, Kyla, finally convinced me to take some essential aminos before I work out. And so every morning I have a little cappuccino and a scoop of vital aminos.
And you're fed. And so we're clear, these are not branched chain aminos. This is the full spectrum. 13 aminos.
All 9 essential amino acids are in there.
And 13 aminos that allows you to then, it's already broken down, allows you to just immediately be fed and make sure that you are getting, or you've covered your sort of protein amino acid needs. So you're not going to go into breakdown.
Yeah,
and work backwards.
Which is a big deal, because if I'm going to make the effort to wake up and actually go work out, I want to make sure that I actually get the adaptation I'm trying to get from my workout. And if I go in totally underfed, it's not going to work.
One of the things I like about it for you too also is that you're drinking a little water with it.
Yeah,
right?
That's actually
sometimes I see people drink coffee. They're super hypohydrated.
Yeah.
They haven't eaten in 10 to 12 hours. They go smash themselves. And I think that's fine. But if you're strength training, it's less fine for sure. One of the other things I want to talk about with the application of these vital aminos is that we have a lot of people in our community on GLP-1s. And what that means is they are often not eating or getting their normal cues to eat, and they're stripping out their muscle mass. So this is an easy way to make sure that you're maintaining your muscle mass,
bases,
even though you don't feel hungry. So I think it's a really nice way to make sure that our friends who are using GLP-1s to change their lives, that we can cover their needs with this vital amino product.
True fact.
And by the way, it tastes great.
It tastes super good.
It's really cool. If you want to learn more, go to livemomentous.com/TRS and use code TRS for 20% off your first purchase. One of the things that I think that's really interesting is that I see a lot of kids who get to the next level and they think that that's the level, because that everyone valued it's about being a Division I athlete, and now you're a Division I athlete, or you're turning pro, and you don't love it. You just kind of pushed into it. Whenever I'm working with injured athletes at that level, especially in college and sometimes in high school, I say, hey, do you still want to play? I'm going to be the first person who says, hey, do you like this? Is this Is this a component? Are you still happy? If you could step out now and there be no trauma, would you do it? And sometimes kids are like, "Ugh," like that injury is very, very tied to, identity and expectation. And sometimes kids are injured because they don't want to go back to the thing and they don't have another out because of the exact same process we've just passed this kid along. And then we get to the next level, which is the place where real development happens. That's the real development window. We're just getting good enough to get to here where you can't be burned out and tired and only there for some other set of reasons because it's too much work.
Exactly. And, there's so much research that shows this, both from the professional side and youth sports side, that essentially you've got to have that intrinsic motivation fire burning. And if you don't, you're gonna be in trouble. In fact, when I was a college coach a number of years ago, for a couple years, I gave every athlete who entered their freshman year this validated survey on motivation. I just wanted to see what it was. And then I forgot about it because I'm dumb and an idiot and just forgot about it for a couple years. And then I found it maybe 4 or 5 years later. And I said, okay, let's look at how all these kids progressed, developed, stayed in the sport, etc.
What an experiment.
And what happened is intrinsic motivation upon entering college predicted improvement. There was a strong correlation towards their later improvement, whether they stayed on the team and how much they got better or didn't. And that stuck with me because what you're looking at is it wasn't like the fancy training. It wasn't the training they did in high school when we looked at all these things. It was like, where was their motivation at? And was it coming from the internal side or external side? Predominantly. We all have internal and external motivators, but where does it come from predominantly? And I think that's the message that we lose. And in fact, even if you look at some of these examples of, phenoms and prodigies who some parents use as look what Tiger Woods did. Like his dad did X, Y, and Z, or Wayne Gretzky trained like crazy as a kid. I went back and researched a lot of these, and it might be biased, but these athletes, Tiger Woods was once asked, what would you do for a phenom of a kid? And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, I put this in the book, but he said essentially it's got to come from them. My dad never forced me to play golf. I wanted to. Wayne Gretzky said, again, paraphrasing something similar, he said, it was fun. I wasn't practicing. I was playing in the backyard when I was, doing all the hockey stuff. And I think that's the message that we forget is sometimes we see the practice and we're like, oh my gosh, this person trained so much at such a young age. That must be it. And it's like, no. It's got to come from that kid. And that was me too. Once I got hooked up on running, I ran a ton in high school, way more than I should have, looking back. But I ran a ton. But I'll tell you this, it wasn't my mom or dad or my coach telling me to do this. In fact, they would have begged me to take a week off during a vacation so that, I didn't have to run during the road trip. It was just me wanting to do it. And I think we need to bring it back to that motivation if we want to talk about youth development in sport, because it's that motivation that's going to keep us going over the long haul.
I love that. What are your thoughts on how we untangle what's going on here or, work to improve it? Because we all, even though maybe we aren't specifically youth coaches, I mean, we are parents of youth coaches. We interact with a lot of youth coaches and parents. I don't know, where do we begin? What we're trying to do in our book is actually figure out sort of a guide for parents to make the experience sane, including making sure that they're on the same page as their kid in terms of why they're in it, so that everybody is aligned. And there's lots more, but I think it's just such a complicated problem, right? We're friends with a lot of coaches. We actually are friends with coaches who run youth sports programs, and their intention is always right. They want to create opportunities for kids to play. At the same time, this is how they pay their mortgage. And I don't know, where do we begin to untangle this? Because I think everybody is aware that even you talking about professional athletes and college coaches saying, what are we going to do about this youth sports problem? In your view, where do we begin to sort of untangle and fix this situation?
I think part of the problem is that it's a societally wide problem that is really hard to untangle. Meaning, parents care a lot, totally understand that. The coaching, again, most of the youth coaches, great. They care a lot. As you said, sometimes the incentives are the wrong direction. But I think it comes down to a couple different things. Is first off, we've got to do a better job of educating to let parents and coaches know that like the shortcut they think they're taking towards success doesn't actually lead to success. Right? The going all in early, doing crazy stuff. The data is, as you pointed out earlier, David Epstein's books, Range, gives some great examples of this, right? I think the other part of it that is really hard societally is we have to almost like redefine what success means. And then look at the other part of the equation, which is the comparison game. I think a lot of this happens because it's so easy to compare yourself to every other kid at the same age level in essentially the world, right? And I'll use an example. So when I started actually getting into running, if I didn't know my wife at the time, we're different ages, but if we were at the same age, she would have beaten me in the mile. And my wife was a phenomenal runner, All-American in college, but she would have, if we looked at, 7th or 8th grade mile time, whatever it is, she would have been faster than me. Now, I wasn't slow. I was pretty fast, right? In my school, I was pretty fast. But if you compared me to everyone in the world, like my wife and several other, girls were faster than me. If I would have known that, how would have that affected my motivation? Would have been like, I'm not doing running. Like, I'm not any good at this. Like, and it's not even comparison to girls, it's comparison to everyone. Like, I would have seen there's young boys the same age as me who are a minute faster. There's no hope there. Our comparison is set so out of whack for what we're used to, which is we kind of evolved and developed to have local comparison so that we could find out, you know what? I'm pretty good at this thing in my local community, so I can contribute and try here. And then that expands. When we no longer have that local comparison, we just compare it against everybody. It's just unrealistic. And what happens is that often, pushes us to either say, like, what's the point? Or pushes us to do crazy shit in order to try and match that comparison. So I think on the comparison side, what we have to do is bring it back down to a local level. Norway is a great example of this. So Norway has phenomenal success in the winter and the Olympics, not just the Winter Olympics. But if you look at their youth sport program, not perfect, but what they do is they do a lot of things that Americans hate. They don't have national, competitions until I think it's like 13 plus, right? There's no young youth national championships. They don't even allow results to be posted online for, I think it's under 12 youth results. Okay. People get trophies there. They have different kind of standards that allow them to accomplish their goal, which is something like fun for all is their slogan, something like that. I don't expect us to adopt all of those things in the US because our culture is different, but I think we could come a little bit further towards that and say, okay, how do we change things to get away from maybe the AAU basketball model and instead say, okay, that's one extreme. We need to come down to middle ground so that we can, again, stop the global or national comparisons and then redefine success away from how many athletes do I get to go to college scholarship and towards something like, how many of these athletes do we keep in sports until they're 18 or something like that?
I love that. So much. There's literally, we could talk about this youth sports thing for another 2 hours. There's so much there. It's so complicated, but I do want to give us plenty of time to talk about your latest book, Win Inside the Game. And what I want to start by saying is you obviously have the same disease we have, which is you keep writing books. And we we understand what that means on many levels. So congratulations on writing another one. I think maybe this is your 5th book or 6th. I don't know if I even got the number right, but it's been a lot of them. And tell us why this book, why now, and
Be a track
what's
coach,
it
they
about?
said.
Yeah,
Write books,
what's it
they said.
about? What's this book about?
Yeah, it's a lot. I tell the youth sports story because what I'm trying to fundamentally do in this book is get us away from chasing only the external things, the extrinsic, the outcomes, the winning at all costs, and instead say, hey, we've got to realign a little bit and worry about the internal things, the things that we just talked about. The identity development, your relationship with the pursuit, the sport, your relationship with how you see that you feel, belonging and acceptance and all those things. Not too dissimilar to what Kelly talked about very early on, is I make the argument that, well, a lot of stuff matters when it comes to performance. One of the key things is if we're going to fulfill our potential and perform at our best, we need to feel secure and safe. We need to feel like we can take a shot and potentially lose or fail and not feel like it's the end of the world and that we're a failure and that our coach or parent is going to ream us out. We need that kind of inner security that allows us to, challenge ourselves and go for it. And I think the argument I also make in the book is that often society, just like youth sports, sets us up to not do these things because we have that comparison, right? We have been told that our pursuits or jobs should define us, meaning if I don't win this thing or if I don't run fast enough, then it's not like, I sucked at this race. It's that I myself, Steve, am a failure. And when we have, that much attachment to the results or outcome, what it does is it pushes us to a place where we're essentially playing prevent defense, right? We're saying, how do I do okay, but not screw up? Because I don't want to screw up majorly because then I'm going to be, the laughing stock. Instead of being able to challenge ourselves, take risks, and see what we can do, which often involves, potentially falling short.
So you have this 3-part framework in the book. Can you tell us what that is and how to apply it?
Absolutely. So, it comes down to what I just said there on identity and development is I kind of see it through 3 lenses. Is we need our relationship with ourself. How do we, see ourselves coming to the activity or pursuit that we're doing? You can't have, the pursuit be entirely you, and you can't have yourself flattened to be, these things. I think often what happens when it comes with identity is in the modern world, we kind of flatten ourselves. We say I am a runner. I am a coach. I am whatever is on my Instagram or Twitter bio. These are the 4 things that you need to know about me, and that's what defines me. And I think we've lost some of the complexity of that. And it turns out that there's some wonderful psychology research that shows that we're more resilient human beings if we have more self-complexity. Meaning we see ourselves through a diverse lens of I do all of these things and all of these things are important and part of me, and none of them are one, self-defining. The second thing that I say is the second pillar is our relationship with our pursuits. So again, do we see those as self-defining? How do we have a relationship with our success and, more importantly, failure in these pursuits? Often when the failure is again self-defining, what happens is psychology research tells us that it literally feels almost like a death of ourself or our ego. That's how we treat it. And when that's what we're working against, of course, we're going to be more self-protective. And then the last pillar is our connection, or how we feel supported or belonging. And I think this is really important when it comes to holistic performance, because as human beings, we have a fundamental need to belong. That's just part of us. And it shapes how we see the challenges before us. So if I'll give you an example, research finds that if we're standing at a really steep bottom of a really steep hill, and you say, hey, Steve, Kelly, do you want to sprint up it? And how steep do you think that is? If I'm standing alone, researchers found I will tell you that hill is way too freaking steep and I do not want to run up it. If I'm standing next to a friend or a teammate, I will run up the hill and I will tell you that it's not that steep. And researchers have done this with lifting weights, dealing with a painful shock or other things. When we're connected, it literally changes our perception of the world. And my argument is we've hijacked belongingness to make it more about like the Instagram version, meaning how many followers do I have? How many superficial like people can I fit in with? Versus the deep, which is how many relationships do I have that are like meaningful, for both me and the other person? How many people in my life do I have that I can call, even if I haven't talked to them for a while, and say, hey, Kelly, I'm struggling with something. Can I talk to you? And the sad reality is that recent research tells us that number is declining. Well, our number of like superficial connections is increasing. So we're replacing like true, genuine connection with like the feel-good candy version. And when we do that, we shift our relationship with our perception of both who we are and the challenges we face. So we've got to kind of reestablish and make that a priority.
How what you just described, shout out Owen Eastwood, Belonging.
I literally was waiting. I was like, I'm waiting for Kelly to shout out Belonging.
Have come to, and I think at different times and eras, coaches recognize that they have to be more competent in a certain domain. I think, Alan Lim, Scratch Labs dragging us, Stacy Sims dragging us into whole food nutrition. Thank you cyclists who are like, no, we're going to eat food. We're going to have to eat these food bars, right? They really just did a good job. We've seen sort of that evolution, maturation. We've gotten very sophisticated in the weight room. This piece now of this really understanding this complex brain, trying to do these things with other people, seems to be like, I didn't get a lot of education in it. And I'm asked recently, like, would you go back and do the same thing? I don't even know if I'd be a physio. I think I'd be a performance coach, only because I'm not even sure if the performance coach psychology gets me to all of these group dynamics or personal dynamics as quickly, but at least I see now that is the biggest opportunity to unkink the hose. Do you feel the same way a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of and that's why similar to you, my journey to this place was roundabout and weird, and you end up in it. But I think it is. And, as a coach, I've always dabbled in this stuff. But had to. One of the eye-opening things to really that shook me in researching this book is I connected with this guy named Gavin, who has Parkinson's, and he was showing me these videos. He was like, "Yeah, I can temporarily, essentially, unlock myself from Parkinson's, where I'm kind of shaking a little bit, barely walking, etc." And he said, I've had to learn this, but like, let me show you some videos on how I do this. And he shows himself, trying to swing a bat at a ball on a tee to hit a tee ball, right? And he does it first alone, and he's shaking and can't do it well. And then he shows me at a video of him doing it with a really good friend standing next to him. And guess what? With the really good friend standing next to him, he gets a couple swings that I'm like, holy, like that is a normal swing. And he's like, yeah, now watch this. He shows me some other videos where he's again walking around to barely, shuffle, etc. He says, watch this. He does something, right? He's like, I'm gonna, bring my dog in, or think of like, look at a picture of my kids and think of gratitude. And for a little bit, he's walking, normally. And it's easy to brush these things off and be like, oh, this guy, who is he? What is it? But if you look at the research, not just for Parkinson's, but for what we now understand with the brain, is we're increasingly learning that the brain is predictive, meaning it takes in what we know in the past, plus all the sensory information we're coming, and it says, hey, like, let's think of what we're going to expect to do. And this guy Gavin told me, without understanding the research, he says, yeah, I think what's happening is like when a friend is nearby, my brain goes like, okay, we're gonna get out of the fear state, which is Parkinson's, and allow you just for a moment to like move a little bit more smoothly. And research actually largely backs up this theory, again, that's young. But for the rest of us, is often what happens is our brain gets in this kind of protective state, and it says, hey, the world is dangerous. I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to do this thing, so I'm going to shut you down. And instead, we're looking at ways, whether that's belonging, that's connection, that's identity, that's understanding, kind of the mental side. We're looking at ways to do the opposite, which is say, hey, brain, don't predict doom, gloom, and threats, right? Predict, this is a problem I can take on. It might be challenging, but I'm capable of. And when we do that, it frees us up to perform.
Love this.
So is that, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, you have specific strategies or thoughts in the book about how to help people who do underperform under pressure perform better under pressure. So I'm assuming what you just talked about is one of those things. But can you elaborate a little more about that? And the reason I want to mention it is, Kelly and I have watched a lot of sport, been around a lot of sport, been athletes ourselves, and it's pretty rare to see the athlete who gets better under pressure. In fact, there's so few that Kelly and I can name them almost. Like we could probably sit here and name, like Rich Froning is one of the examples we give. CrossFit, many-year CrossFit Games champion. I mean, all you have to do is watch Rich Froning compete over a series of days and under more complex conditions, and he actually gets better. And it's so obvious. I mean, you can see it on TV as a spectator, but he seems to be more like the exception versus the norm. So I would love to know, like, what's, if you're working with an athlete who does not have that, whatever it is Rich Froning has, hard to define what it is, but if you're working with an athlete who doesn't have that, like what tools and strategies do you try to help work with them on? How do you resolve this or help them resolve it?
Yeah, I think the step one is understanding that it's really rare to be a Rich Froning. Because so often what happens is we see these athletes and we're like, oh, I want to be Rich Froning. I want to be Michael Jordan. And we don't realize that they are the exception. Like even among elite athletes, they are the exception. Several years ago, I sat down with a bunch of some of the best American marathoners in the U.S. and asked them, hey, during the middle of the marathon, how many of you, think about stepping in a hole or dipping into the porta pot and not coming out? And every hand went up, right? And these are some of the best, because we all have those doubts and insecurities that comes with pressure of performing on the big day. So I think
I call it the dread. Yeah. I'll tell Juliet, I'm like, I have the dread, and I know I care about it. Something's happening. I got to perform, because otherwise I'm fine, but then all of a sudden the dread shows up.
Bingo. That's it. So I think there's a number of different ways, and the key is nothing works for everyone, right? And this is why it's so complex. But I think some of the strategies that I found interesting that work well are, number one is often we protect ourselves because like we protect our identity from getting hurt if we care about that thing. So I saw some science and some examples of people who came up with simple solutions. One of which you're probably familiar with in sports, but a sports psychologist called it putting on a game face. Meaning there's a reason that, Deion Sanders was, prime. There's a reason Kobe was Black Mamba. There's a reason Aaron Judge says, hey, when I walk on the field, I'm number 99, not Aaron. Because what that does is it creates just a little bit of space between who they are as a person and who they are competing, which allows them and frees them up to perform because it like doesn't attack who they are as a person, right? I'm 99 out there. I go home with my wife and kids. I'm Aaron. Yeah, they're interconnected, but like I don't have to bring 99 home. And I think that is one way to help protect ourselves from the pressure, which allows us to free ourselves up. The other strategies that I think are really interesting is that from a biological standpoint, what often happens is we get this surge of stress hormones, right? And those stress hormones push us to be more avoidant and protective. So we can, it's kind of this like cycle that just spirals out of control. We can disrupt that to a degree. So there's some fascinating, simple psychology and physiology that shows like if you dunk your head in cold water when you're feeling pressure, it will decrease that cortisol stress response and like bring down that sympathetic nervous system, because your body essentially goes into like two things, kind of a shock, and has this what we call the diving reflex, right? Which kind of calms us down. So whenever people ask me about like cold plunges and ice baths, they say like, look, if you're feeling stressed, like you should probably do that, because that will shift you away from the pressure of the game and make your body think like, okay, I just experienced this shock. I'm feeling a lot. I'm going to pay attention to this and not the stress of going to play a game. And often you come out of that and you feel ready to go. So there's these like, I call them like physiological disruptors, where you're just like interfering with the physiology just a little bit, almost like confusing where the information is coming from. So it says like, oh, this must not be the stress or the pressure. This must be over here. So we're okay. We don't have to be on high alert. And whether we look at it from the psychology side or the physiology side, I think your best bet is having a bunch of tools. And again, I named dozens of them, but a bunch of tools to have at your disposal to say, okay, in this situation, how do I get out of the state where I'm going to be fear and avoidant and get in a state where I can feel, at least somewhat comfortable, like approaching the problem or the task, with some challenge instead of a threat.
I think it's so cool to have these tools available, because I do think there's a lot of athletes who sort of bucket themselves like, I'm not good under pressure. And then that's also an identity that they take on. Like, well, I'm just someone who's not good under pressure, or I am someone who's good under pressure, right? But that's not true, right? It's a malleable, changeable thing, and certainly shouldn't be like an identity that someone sets into. There's lots of ways to change it.
I love that our youngest daughter, Caroline, who's a goalie, which is just the worst position psycho-emotionally for a human being she's so good at staying chill, and she's so chill and doesn't get up and doesn't get down. She's found these strategies because she's gonna get scored on, it doesn't matter. And but she loves when she's playing for a bigger stake. She's like, oh yeah, it makes me focus better, I play better, like I love the pressure. And she sort of begin to identify that, oh, this is an opportunity for my brain to really pay attention, and I don't have to work as hard to care and to get up. And I don't think I've seen her overwhelmed yet, but it's fun to see the nascent patterning of her saying, oh, this is actually good. That a really good, she was playing in the pool the other night, and there's a national team athlete there, superstar, playing and shooting. And Caroline's like, man, I had such great practice, because she gave a damn about, impressing this girl. So anyway.
The only thing I'll say, though, Steve, is that you just killed my opportunity to continue to make fun of Kelly, because he likes to stick his actual head in our ice bath all the time. And I just...
Because you don't understand what it's like to be married to you, to try to
I was like, I just conclude that he's weird and, make fun of him. And now he's going to be like, no, Steve told me that this is what I should be doing. We played for a national championship
last year, and which is a big deal to be able to coach a team through a season of national championship. And already I'm like, when we go back to the Natty, I'm like, ice bucket head, like it's on. It's so good. I'm going to make sure everyone on our team reads this book, because it's so great. Last question I want to ask. I know you are the worst case scenario for us, because all we think about and obsess about. What surprised you most about this project?
Oh man, that's a great question, Kelly. What surprised me most,
or change your worldview a little bit?
I think the biggest thing that surprised me or changed my worldview is that, again, my background is the physiology, right? This is what I do. I can talk, all the physiology stuff, the VO2 max and lactate threshold, all that all day. But what fascinated me is how much the mind and body interacted if you look at the latest science. Meaning, like, there is an interplay between both, and they each affect one another. And even if we look at things like, for instance, VO2 max, it shifts based on some psychology. And I actually ran an experiment early on when I had this idea for this book years ago. It was in the nascent years, but I ran this experiment where I put my college team through a VO2 max test. So experienced runners on the treadmill, essentially I'm going to increase the speed until you either cry uncle or fly off the thing, right? And then we'll find out your VO2 max. And we ran the study in two different ways. One way, I ran it where I was in control. I ran a normal protocol, which is like every couple minutes, I'm going to increase the speed. And then the other way we ran it, I said, I don't care how you get there. I just want you to get to complete exhaustion at around 10 minutes. You're in charge. I'm just going to watch. And what happened is, for the well-trained runners, when they were in charge, their VO2 max number was something like 4 or 5, milliliters of oxygen more.
Wow.
Than when I was in charge. And I was blown away by that, but it was a simple physiological shift that occurred because, and if you look at the research, shows for well-trained people, when you are competent in the thing, you tend to do better when you convince yourself you have more control over the outcome or the process to get there. Not necessarily the outcome, but the process to get there. I am in charge of getting myself to exhaustion. I can get to complete exhaustion. You perform worse when that is taken away from you. Now, the opposite actually occurs in novices because they don't have enough experience to understand how to get them to that place.
Oh, that's a lesson. Wow.
So interesting.
Yeah. So we ran the same study on, less experienced runners. They didn't do better in when they had control. And again, a simple psychological switch that we didn't do much to influence, but it literally changes their physiological max number of output. And I think those kind of things are reminders to me where it's like, hey, this messy world of performance and competition, it's messy for a reason. And that's why, as coaches, as practitioners in this area, we've just got to kind of appreciate it and do our best to understand it and realize that it's not a simple mathematical problem, and it never will be. And if we treat it like that, we're never going to fulfill people's potential.
Because human beings are behind it. Yeah, I love that. Is so fascinating. I would love to learn more about that.
If you're going to be a more self-actuated Somali pirate, you have to be like, I am the captain.
Okay, so what I would like to say to anyone listening to this is that if, Kelly and I have a pretty short list of people we follow on Instagram where we are like, whatever they say, it's a yes to that. And you are one of those people. So if you're listening and you're hoping to add to your quiver a reasonable mind in the madness, follow at Steve Magness on Instagram for sure. And your book is Win Inside the Game, coming out on February 4th. Am I right? Did I get the date right?
Correct.
I don't know when this is launching, so it could be, if it's past February 4th, then you can find it wherever you get your books. And if not, pre-order it, because that really helps authors.
Pre-order it.
And what else? Where else can we send people to learn more and follow you and become fans?
I appreciate it. It means a lot coming from you guys. I respect everything that you do, so that means a lot. I'm at Steve Magness on all social media, stevemagness.com for my website, and you can see the newsletter I do with Brad Stolberg there as well. So that's it. Check out the book if you like it, and I appreciate everything you guys are doing as well.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Steve.